too. So
Oh, mazel tov.
stop
Yeah, no,
following him around, Corey. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we're pretty we're pretty well set up here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, we have about a minute, so we're live, but just to be complete.
Yeah, this is the spot of the panel where we're all grabbing a little bit of water. Everyone's sort of filing in. I'm looking over my notes last second and hoping I didn't forget anything, stuff like that.
And nobody's making a gigantic pile of their books.
No,
Let's be let's be professionals about this.
I'd say look behind Corey. I feel like he's already made a gigantic pile of books.
Oh, those are other people's books.
Yeah, those are other people.
The shelf of my books is over there somewhere. There. Out of shot.
Yeah. I'll just say solid collection, man.
Thank you very
solid
much.
Collection.
Yeah. I like the pleasant plate.
And the giant mountain of authors' copies is over there in the metal shelving that's groaning and collapsing. What do I do with the Hungarian edition shelf?
Learn Hungarian.
Yeah, well, exactly. I already know what the book says. I don't need to learn Hungarian to understand it.
I've heard of people who found out that their translated versions have almost no resemblance to what they wrote. So
there's a better version of that. The German publisher Heine, which is Random House, for many years had a deal with a local soup company, and they would insert one-page scenes in the middle of the most active parts of classic science fiction novels in which everyone stopped and ate soup. They're amazing. Like as the SenseNet constructs are being exfiltrated by the Panther Moderns and Neuromancer, everybody stops and eats soup.
As you do.
As you do.
Yes. So we're actually past time, so I'd like to get going. First off, just some housekeeping things. If you want to ask questions, the easiest way is to join the Zoom session and use the Q&A feature. And towards the end, I will bring up questions, and I'll try and keep an eye on it as we go as well. I will try and keep an eye on the Twitch chat as well, but no promises. I guess we have to do the required brief introduction of who everyone is here and why they think they're on this panel. So let's start with Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Ma. I have written in 15 novels, most of them under the name E.M. Tippett. I made a living for a while as an indie published romance author. These days, I'm just trying to get back into my science fiction and fantasy roots. I'm one of Corey's former students, so I can blame him for all. No, I'm kidding. As for my qualifications to be on this panel, I do have a degree in economics. It's older than cryptocurrencies, though. Those didn't exist when I got my degree. And I'm half Chinese, and we came up with the independent store of value that is the foundation of modern currency. And we'll see how far those get me in this panel.
Okay, Tim.
Okay, I'm Tim Anderson. I'm a video game developer. I've also been working with sort of some stock software for the last year. So, I mean, I don't know if that's why I'm on this panel. I don't even I'm not terribly great with Bitcoin, but I'm on this panel because it's going to be a lot of fun.
Okay, and Corey.
Hi, I'm Cory Doctorow. I'm a science fiction novelist, and I think my closest relation to this panel is this, a book called For the Win, which is a science fiction novel about gold farming and virtual currencies that also predates cryptocurrencies. In terms of kind of laying my cards on the table, economically, I'm a modern monetary theory person, which means that I'm incredibly skeptical of accounts of inflation that are foundational to much of the cryptocurrency story. I also work for a nonprofit called the Electronic Frontier Foundation that has spent many years campaigning for digital rights, including the right to privacy, including privacy in financial transactions. And that won the lawsuit, the Bernstein case that made cryptography for civilian access legal. And just one second, I'm going to grab something to show you. I just realized I should get this off the wall. So it used to be that strong cryptography was illegal. It was classed as a munition, and the NSA allowed a very weak cipher called DES 50 to be used by civilians. And they said it was strong enough that the mafia couldn't break it, but weak enough that cops could. And John Gilmore designed a computer called Deep Crack. And if you look on the dies of these chips, you will see this is one of the boards from Deep Crack. And it was used to brute force that cipher and decrypt and come up with all of the possible keys for it in 2.5 hours. And at a cost of about $250,000. Actually, the whole computer, Deep Crack, is sitting beside me. It's about the size of a bar fridge. John got tired of having it in his garage, so I have it on permanent loan here.
And for what it's worth, I'm Arlen Feldman. I'm a software guy, founder and our co-founder and CTO of a company called Sharewell, that the marketing company tells me is one of the leading ITSM providers in the world. I also write doorstop-sized computer books, and I'm slightly little bit published fiction. And I am also, I spend a lot of time explaining to people why I think Bitcoin is not a good thing for them to invest their time, particularly also blockchain. That might explain my personal biases when we come to this panel. What I'd like to do, though, instead of just diving right into Bitcoin, is I'd like to break this up into 3 separate sections. The first thing I'd like to talk about, and I think this actually fits particularly with Emily and Corey's background, is the need, if we feel like there is a need, for an anonymous, non-centralized electronic currency. If we feel, is that something we should have? Never mind whether or not we actually have it. Then I'd like to talk about whether Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the others actually fit the bill. And then if we have time, I'd like to talk about, in these panels, as we do, actually solve the problem and come up with a solution that we can then spread out to the rest of the world that explains how we should really be doing this. Does anyone in particular want to start as far as, should we have anonymous, non-centralized electronic money? We already have anonymous, non-centralized money to an extent, which is, money. I can pull it out of my wallet and no one knows what I'm spending it on. So
I can throw my opinion out there because it'll be short, and then everybody else can take it from there. To me, what's most interesting about cryptocurrencies are cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, where the market transactions are actually coded into the currency itself, and so that the market for the currency is decentralized. Because it seems to me to be the way of the future, so that currency and economies and markets move with wherever we take them. Take it away. I mean, Corey's going to have a lot more, I think, useful stuff to say about privacy and all of that.
So I guess I am balanced on the knife edge of a contradiction, because I certainly see the virtue of financial secrecy in justice struggles. And this was really brought home to me when I actually had a collegial debate with a colleague of mine at the Electronic Frontier Foundation about financial secrecy, which, as we see through the FinCEN leaks and the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers and so on, financial secrecy is in many ways a cancer that is allowing the worst criminals in the world to get away with the worst crimes in human history. But, this colleague of mine said, look, I used to be a campaigner in West Virginia for queer rights. And prior to Obergefell and other lawsuits that changed the contours of civil rights in America, teachers could get fired for being queer. And we ran a campaign to help reform that rule in West Virginia. And all of our financing came in cash money stuffed into envelopes. Because if you wrote us a check and you were a teacher and the name on the check got out, you'd lose your job. And so I certainly see the value there, that there is an indirect but powerful way in which money is power. And the argument against anonymity, that we would all be better off if we didn't have it because then we'd be our true selves, is a terrible argument, primarily made by people whose sins are routinely forgiven by society by dint of their privilege, while comparable sins committed by people who lack their privilege are punished with the most extreme force. Think of the African-American man who made headlines this week because he was released after several decades of a 25-year sentence for stealing a set of hedge clippers, right? So, you know, like the Jeffrey Toobin's going to be fine, right? But you know, the parents who live in close quarters in a small home with inadequate spacing with other homes, who inadvertently expose themselves in a window and get caught and get charged with, you know, public indecency in the presence of children, and who are poor or racialized, those people are going to go to jail for a long time. And so there's obviously a reason to understand that privacy is particularly of benefit to the most marginalized people, and privacy is how marginalized people organize themselves to demand recognition. Ironically, right? The way that you get to the point where you can come out to your parents or to society and demand rights as a queer person is by first finding other queer people, making common cause with them, understanding it, formulating a game plan, having private conversations with people who aren't queer and don't face social sanction, revealing yourself to them, and so on. So there's definitely a lot going for privacy there. I am of the opinion, and I think that this is factually true, that the origin and current use of money is that governments create money when they spend it, and that governments annihilate money when they tax it, that taxes don't pay for programs, that the thing that any more than old iTunes gift cards that have been redeemed are used to are recirculated to make new iTunes gift cards, that the money is mostly zeros in a spreadsheet at the central bank, and that the point of money is to create a way for states to mobilize human capital in service to the state's interests. And that, moreover, all the money that hasn't been taxed out of existence is the money that we have to spend. And that is also commonly known as the federal debt. And so when you eliminate federal debt, you eliminate capital in the public's hands. And typically what tends to happen is you get the creation of credit money, which is money that banks create through fractional reserve spending, that has the advantage to the banks and their shareholders of generating interest. And so, you know, the story of cryptocurrency that says that it forces us to live within our means is actually a mechanism by which the access to capital that is needed to keep society running is privatized and turned into interest-bearing instruments that take the rich and allow them to tax all of the other enterprises that we have, right? Rather than, you know, when you pay taxes to the government, that money just gets annihilated. When you pay interest to the bank, that's actually a tax in the sense that we think of it. And it goes to line the pockets of the bankers and their shareholders.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the reasons I was kind of hoping that Elizabeth Warren would be the head of the ticket was if there was ever a time where it might be possible to try modern monetary theory, now would kind of be the perfect time to say, we need to flood the country with money, and there should be no harm, no foul from from just literally printing that, well, not literally printing that money, literally creating that money as zeros in that system you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and we did it in 2008, right? The inflation that was
Yeah.
supposed to happen after the bailout in 2008 never emerged. We haven't seen inflation emerging in after the $7 trillion in money creation that we just went through with CARES and its associated acts. We see asset bubbles, right? And you know, where that looks like inflation is when we securitize human necessities like housing, and then asset bubbles become inflationary because the asset is actually also a thing that you need so you don't die.
Yeah. Tim, any thoughts on the need for anonymous decentralized currency?
I'll say, first of all, that is very hard to follow up there. But I will say that, like, I think that there is very much a need for it for a number of different reasons. I mean, to some of Corey's points, like, there is sort of an almost equalization for those that maybe weren't able to raise up the money before they were born, basically, where they can farm Bitcoins and whatnot. And there is sort of a certain equalization. There's also a certain amount of, like, when people are doing online transactions, like, I was recently selling an in-game item to someone, an video game item. And what I found with that is the site that they had, like, you could pay with credit card and it would take like 5 or 6 days and it would have to go through. But Bitcoins, it was like instantly there. You didn't have to worry about like crossing over like what sort of like currency you were going to have to switch over. You didn't have to worry about like making sure that all the charges went through. You just had it right there, you know? And I mean, like, I think that having a necessity where you can actually send someone money across basically time zones without having to worry about currency conversion is a great thing. And I mean, especially when you add in the anonymity there to kind of what Corey's point was as well, that if you are like trying to spend money to like, if you are like trying to donate for like, say, LGBT rights and you're worried about losing your job if it comes out, then like having an anonymous source where you can donate is probably a safe thing, even though, well, it's probably a good thing, even though there are definitely like certain cautionary tales to that. Billionaires that might be putting in way more than they could using something like this.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that comes, I think about this a little bit because it is such a balance because of the ways that anonymous money is used. I mean, there's a reason why the government has stopped printing bills larger than $100 or 50 pounds in Britain. It's hard to travel with money. And if you think of some of the civil forfeiture claims we've seen where people are trying to travel with their money, and having some way of actually moving your assets in a safe and secure way, I think is huge. At the same time, there's no denying that electronic currencies are being used by criminals to a great extent, and the government will claim that that's the majority of what it's being used for, and that's why they want to regulate and block it. And I don't know, and I open up this to the panel, if there is any way to balance that and or convince at least some of the governments that this is something that should exist. I mean, so that's more or less the question.
I want to step back one stage and just talk about whether or not you need to worry about currency conversions when you do these. This is, let me see if I can get this framed up right. This is Bitcoin over the last 5 years. So maybe you don't have to worry about what the share is doing at the moment, what the stock is doing, or what the asset is doing at the moment against the USD, like whether USD and GBP are going up and down. But like, you could buy a thing for the price of a pizza, and if you'd held on to it, it would have been worth the price of a house. And so there, you know, like, yes, you do elide some of the complexity, but you replace it with another form of complexity that's arguably harder to manage, I think.
Yeah, and
Agreed.
also
And I think I'm talking more on the short-term sort of thing. Like my dad a while back had some trouble with losing some of his money in Italy, and there was a lot of like transferring money over, having to get it converted over to I think it was euros. And like, yeah, I'm more talking short-term. Long-term, yeah, like holding on to it, especially with the Bitcoin sort of bubble we had a while back. Yeah.
although you have to be very careful with Bitcoin, and I will be, I definitely have a few things to say this, but one of the issues with Bitcoin is there is no guarantee that your transaction will happen in a timely manner. And in fact, you have to bribe the people creating the blocks to consider your block and your transaction anytime soon. So some people it's running 10 days behind. You'll sometimes see 60 days behind. And if you looked at Corey's chart, the amount of worth that may have been gained or lost in that period of time could be quite considerable. So that's why you don't want to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin, because
No.
I think right now the transaction fee is somewhere around $14 to $40 depending. So unless you're willing to kick in another $40 to make your transaction happen more quickly, not quite so short term. Does anyone have any thoughts about, I mean, other than the viability of Bitcoin and some of these other ones, does anyone have any other thoughts about how we balance the idea of anonymous currency? And by the way, Bitcoin, of course, is not actually anonymous, but that's another issue. Versus, you know, we want to create something that can protect the LGBTQ community and not the Russian oligarchs? Is that even a possibility, or is that just the way life is?
Well, I mean, we can talk about, let's start from what we do these days, which is that certain kinds of currency are anonymous and certain kinds aren't, and certain transaction sizes are anonymous and certain aren't. And so for what it's worth, the current attempt to achieve that balance is if it's over a certain amount, if you try to move a certain amount of money, that gets recorded. Small amounts, though, tend to go fairly anonymously.
So, for example, you can't fly with more than $10,000 without.
If you
telling
withdraw
people, without,
more than a certain amount from your bank account, the
Yeah.
bank just needs to report that.
right. So if maybe there was something like that for electronic currency, or if you buy a building, you have to say who you are. If you invest in a political campaign, you have to say who you are. Although again, that comes back to some difficulties
feel like
in some areas.
I feel like then the problem is, like, even if you take it down to that level, then it's real easy to just set up a botnet to pull out a bunch of small transactions that would equal that
Which
big
happens.
transaction and have
Yeah.
it go right under the radar.
And that is a technique of moving dark money around. It's lots of little transactions, automated, that kind of thing. So there's no foolproof system. But I just threw that out because that seems like a good place to start, because it's where we are now.
Yeah.
I want to talk about like the some of the fundamentals here. Like I started off bringing up my weird piece of computer history. You know, we've had these really bad policies in the past about computers, and also bad policies about other things like fossil fuels and so on. And when you like look really hard at them, you often find that the distortion in the policy, the thing that makes it diverge from reality, and like, just in case anyone didn't quite get the point of that motherboard that I brought out, we were at a point where the Clinton administration was prepared to force us to like validate the firmware updates for our heart implants and our anti-lock braking systems, and also like protect all of our financial transactions using a system that you could break for $250,000 in 2.5 hours. And that would have been like the bulwark against the destruction of everything protected by computers in America, a $250,000 hurdle that had to be overcome. It was a colossally bad piece of policy, and those colossally bad pieces of policy often have some kind of oligarchic backing. They've got someone who is in a corrupt way benefiting from that policy, who extracts high rents from the policy and reinvests them in the continuation and expansion of the policy. You know, Exxon profiting from climate change, or from the things that create climate change, and then investing in confusion about climate change. And you know, when we talk about stuff like bad policies about LGBTQ, or when we talk about the risk to cryptography in a modern state, which are not just cryptanalysis and like code breaking, but also states that don't respect human rights have access to a very powerful form of cryptanalysis called rubber hose cryptanalysis, which is when you tie someone to a chair and hit them with a rubber hose until they tell you what the passphrase is. And you know, there is no key length that defends against rubber hose cryptanalysis. What defends against it is a legitimate state. And to the extent that financial secrecy destabilizes and delegitimizes states by enabling the laundering of the proceeds from corrupt activity that then goes into distorting policy and so on, you have these two antithetical goals, right? The defense of the financial secrecy, we should at least admit, even if we're going to say in the end we want it, but the defense of the financial secrecy doesn't just enable crimes, it enables the specific crimes that we are saying we need financial secrecy to defend against. And so that, I think, is really the crux here, is whether you can ever like beat the machine with the machine, you know.
So we're looking for, I mean, it is specifically impossible to create something that actually solves two problems that are opposite of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other comments on that?
Well, I mean, just from a perspective point of view, I think where we screw up the worst is when we see the state as the origin of these systems, where rather than understanding that human activity is something that the state is trying to co-opt and regulate and things, but these things crop up in the wild. I mean, it's been a long time since we had, bank specific currencies. So we do tend to think of currency as intrinsically tied to government. That's not where it came from, though. And that's not, I mean, I think cryptocurrencies are kind of taking us back to something a lot more authentic, where humans are going to do what they're going to do, and governments need to then sort of figure out how to manage the situation. And I think where policymakers often shoot themselves in the foot is they consider government the origin of the innovation, and therefore overestimate the knowledge base that they have and the regulations that they're going to be able to levy, because they don't recognize that it's a wild phenomenon. It's a wild human behavior phenomenon that they're trying to co-opt.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that, Emily? Are you talking about like the I can't make the confluence of interests? I can't make change for a cow with chickens, and so we spontaneously create a token? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, or just maybe I mischaracterize it, but it seems to me that the computer, being able to hack the algorithm that would keep your financial transactions secret. It seems like the government was just massively overconfident in thinking that they could come up with a system that is easy for the police to hack and hard for criminals to hack. And people don't necessarily recognize that in order to keep a government legitimate, it isn't so much about, formalized power. It is very much about how you deal with human innovation. Do you find a way to keep the human innovation going through lawful channels that benefit people, as opposed to just letting it run wild? To just ridiculously oversimplify it. A couple of people in my writers group are lawyers, and I'm a recovering attorney myself. And one of the things we joke about is when you're creating a new society, one of the most important things is you need to make it easy for people to make money lawfully, because you don't want smart people to go into crime. You want smart people to have an easier time making a living lawfully, because once you get smart people going to crime, you are screwed. And there's a fair amount of, human history and organized crime and, modern corruption that you can trace back to. These people were smart and they could not make money legally very easily. And then they become very, very hard to control because they are smart. These are the people that you should want working in your government. But you're not going to be able to force them in. You've got to create a system where it makes sense for them to be there.
Yeah. Because once they go into crime, then they capture regulation and make whatever they are doing not be a crime anymore. I think
it's partially that, but they also, I think, are very good about like figuring out like the edges of that regulation, where something like could technically be legal even though it really shouldn't be.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Emily.
I was going to say, but it's also very simply that, if you're trying to do a cryptocurrency, the smart programmers, if they don't work for the government, you're never going to have a very good encryption. The people out in the wild are going to be better at it. So your government's just kind of like, whistling in a rainstorm. And
I want to recommend a book here at this juncture specifically, which is David Graeber's Debt, the First 5,000 Years. Graeber actually just died of coronavirus, or presumptively of coronavirus, massive organ failure in Italy. But he's an anthropologist, and this was a giant bestseller that really made it's a mark on a lot of science fiction writers and readers. Charlie Strauss's Neptune's Brood is a book based on Debt, the First 5,000 Years. Joe Walton's written a bunch of essays about it. And the reason I recommend it specifically is it talks about the money story and where money first comes from. And we have a money story that's taught in classical economics that is this confluence of interest stories where the unwieldiness of trading cows for chickens spontaneously gives rise to a coinage. And there's no evidence in the historic record for it, right? What we actually see, the first forms of money were actually ledgers, right? It was Babylonians recording that, you owe so many bushels of wheat at the next harvest. And it was always related to tax. That tax seems to be where money comes from. The first coin currency that we see are imperial coinage issued to occupying soldiers that the empire didn't want to have to provision with food and other necessities. And so they levied a tax payable in the coin that the soldiers received as payment on the people whose lands were occupied. And in order to get the coin to pay your tax and not have your farm burned to the ground, you had to sell food to soldiers. And so all money seems to begin with tax and debt. And there aren't, notwithstanding the wildcat dollars of the, the pre-greenback era in the US and, modern cryptocurrency, we don't really have like a rich history anywhere in the world of money that emerges spontaneously through commerce. The commerce seems to follow from the creation of a tax by a temporal authority that makes the commerce possible by, among other things, creating a rule of law that creates contractual, like a contractual foundation on which we can trade, so that after I give you my cow for your chickens, you don't just cut my throat and take the cow back, you know?
Right. But
Yeah,
what about the idea of the forming an independent store of value, having materials that are not particularly useful, that are
Well,
nevertheless desired because of their perceived value?
yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because the other thing that we see from history and that Graeber is really good about documenting is the recurring jubilees, and the fact that that these stores of value would actually, over time, because of the natural dynamics of markets, divert all productive activity within an economy to servicing private debts. And that every now and again, the king would just wipe out all the debts because there would be no resource left to actually develop the economy, because everything would be being funneled into debt service. And so the store of value, I think, has always been, in the historic record, the store of value has always been very temporary, right? It's always been very contingent, and your value, that store of value, would be wiped out at punctuated intervals to rescue the economy from what we're living through now, with a huge productive millstone around the necks of our best educated young adults in the form of student debt, for example, not to mention housing debt overhangs and so on, that act as a drag on the real economy, right? You have rentiers who have securitized subprime student debt, who produce nothing of value, and you have these people who have these exquisite educations that could be put to value. And instead of having those people's education be put to value, they end up working 7 Starbucks jobs to make payment on their coupon, so that this non-producing rentier class can continue to have a passive income. And whatever you feel about whether rentierism is or isn't just, like, as a society, the rentier produces very little, whereas the engineer produces quite a lot. And it makes no sense to enrich the rentier if it means turning the engineer into a barista.
Right. And I mean, as somebody who makes, a certain portion of my income from investing, I do think it's ridiculous. I do think
Yeah.
it's absurd. It's
Yeah.
and people, when people say the stock market is in the economy, that they're not joking. I mean, what we're basically doing is a ritualistic sort of betting process that doesn't actually increase people's well-being. It doesn't actually at this point drive the economy to, it's making use of power differentials that allow us just basically to squeeze the lower classes.
I mean, look at the Hertz bubble. Look at the Hertz Robinhood bubble after Hertz went bankrupt and had a tulip bulb moment where it suddenly was at its peak value for 10 years. And of course, that bankruptcy was triggered by financialization, right? By Hertz splitting itself into 11 different entities that all leased cars to each other in this giant shell game that produced ledger wealth while actually depriving
Right.
anyone of a usable car.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on board with some of the people who come from that world, and their worldview is so skewed. I mean, where in their world, the people who do stuff are, oh yeah, you can replace them. Oh, we can find engineers, we can find ditch diggers. What really matters is us putting in the money and then making the deal that makes the other deal and leveraging on the debt. And it's not that they're evil, bad people. They just do not understand. They have a completely skewed view of the world, and it is truly terrifying.
So
I think I've sat through some board meetings just going, yeah, I mean, the entire time listening to these people talk.
Well, this is another tangent, but my last book, Radicalized, had a novella in it called The Mask of the Red Death. That's my take on Poe. That's full of financial engineers in a luxury bunker as the world crumbles. And it was grounded in the anthropology of preppers. And what you find when you look at what preppers prepare for is they prepare for disasters in which their skills will be useful, irrespective of whether those disasters are likely. So, there's a great anthropological study of a prepper who is a water chemist and who spent his whole career preparing for the terrorists to poison the water supply, not because he thinks it's likely, but because like he would be the hero if it happened. And the interesting thing about this in respect of luxury bunkers and preppers is what are financial raiders good for at the end of the world?
Right.
Like what skill do they bring to the table?
Although I have to admit, computer programmer and author are not, neither of those are going to really say,
Hey,
I will give
storytellers
computer program-
matter. Storytellers, there's a
Yeah.
reason why they're
my
around.
wife who can
You know-
plot things and grow stuff, it's probably way more valuable than I am.
But we're going to need to figure out how to get all like the sanitation systems back online, and they're all computerized. And
Oh, yeah,
so we're
yeah,
going to need,
yeah,
we're going to need
absolutely.
programmers who
And
can do that, or all
yeah.
die of cholera. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean,
can
like, there's a certain amount of the
totally
logic
go
as well with the computer programmer too. Just you can figure out like I mean, like even if like things go completely haywire and like everything's eradicated, you're still gonna have to figure out like, okay, so how can I loop a trebuchet to keep knocking down coconuts for me so I can eat?
Right.
You know?
So to as much as this is fun, just to bring stuff vaguely back to the topic of the panel. So let me bitch about Bitcoin for a minute, and then you guys can tell me I'm wrong or continue with it. So Bitcoin is sold as something that it is absolutely not. It's not anonymous, it's pseudonymous, and we've proven that you can actually trace people. It's supposed to not be centralized, but it kind of is centralized because there's 5 or 6 exchanges. We don't know who owns them, but chances are at least 3 of them are owned by China. If you own 50.1% of the miners, you control the world. It looks like if you own about 30%, you probably control the entire system. So if you want to jump in and do stuff, the fact that it's immutable is great unless you buy something and you want a refund, which again, with cash, there may or may not be a way of doing that. The blockchain itself is full of child pornography and all sorts of other things that you absolutely can't. Okay, links that many of them are dead, fair enough. But it's hard to do certain types of transactions with blockchain because you actually have to find someone who will do it. It's great, by the way. I know people who've made millions of dollars on Bitcoin, just the same way you can make millions of dollars on the stock market just by trading it. But you haven't actually, as we were just discussing, added or removed value from the world. It's also one of the issues with Bitcoin for me is there was a specific rule built in that there will be a limited amount of Bitcoin, based on the same reason that currency should be based on gold, because gold is shiny and shiny things are valuable because they are shiny. So there's a limited amount of Bitcoin, and it gets harder and harder to figure out how to deal with transactions. So Bitcoin, and by the way, it uses more power than several small countries. Although there are people who are working around it. Tim, you mentioned the idea that there are people who are mining Bitcoin who can get into it. You can't anymore because the people who are really doing this are buying, racks upon racks of dedicated hardware. So
I was talking like in the early days, but yeah.
Yeah, in the early days it was different. Other than that, I think it's great.
Other than everything.
I was under the impression though that Bitcoin's kind of the rough draft. I mean, what do you guys think? I mean, it seemed to me that it was like kind of the first. I don't know that it was the first cryptocurrency, but it was the first one to kind of take off and make any particular mark.
Yeah.
But it seems like people have a lot of changes that they would make.
So the other big one right now, Bitcoin is by far the biggest. The next one down, which is about 1/10 the size, is Ethereum, which was not originally designed to be a currency. It was designed to be a blockchain ledger, which, by the way, the algorithms for Bitcoin, the encryption, perfect, no trouble. Granted, other than some quantum massive other thing. It's every bit of technology around it that is full of holes. So some kid copied their PHP scripts and created an exchange. That's where all of the holes exist. Ethereum it's slightly faster, but it's still based on the whole proof of work thing. There are people talking about other algorithms, like proof of stake, which is you should trust me because I'm willing to let you hold up my money for a while. Or proof of burn, which is you should trust me because I'm willing to light my money on fire for you. But Ethereum keeps claiming that they're going to go to proof of stake. And every time they get close, there's a big argument with, frankly, the libertarian aspect behind it, which is, no, if you touch this, you're breaking it, and we need to split off and be a whole different currency. That's happened to Bitcoin as well, where they wanted to double the number of transactions, and that was akin to starting a nuclear war. But there are some that are, well, Corey, you had something to add.
I was going to say that, I think that in character, having spoken at a bunch of Bitcoin and Ethereum events, in character, the Bitcoin crowd seems to be more kind of gold buggish, more inflation hawkish, and more, wedded to this, as far as we can tell, apocryphal story about where money comes from. And Ethereum tends to be kind of more social democratic and maybe more utopian in a like kind of less Ayn Randy way, less kind of war of all against all. That one of the things about the blockchain is that it's a ledger that doesn't require a trusted third party. And there are lots of times when you would want a ledger that doesn't require a trusted third party, but the assumption that you could never trust a third party is itself a very kind of libertarian view, right? That like you couldn't have just a legitimate authority that we all assumed was on the up and up because of the way we structured the power around it. Instead, we have to have these kind of self-enforcing systems. Emily, you mentioned smart contracts earlier. I wrote smart contracts into my this is great. I'm sitting next to my bookshelf. I can do this. I've never done this at a con before. My second novel, Eastern Standard Tribe, which I think was like 2004, has a smart contract in it. This is an idea that's been kicking around in cypherpunk circles since the 90s. I'm really interested in the idea of self-executing smart contracts and the distributed autonomous organizations. Carl Schrader's last book has a whole society oriented around these, including a bunch of like radical transformation groups that are kind of populist and use DAOs to manage themselves. There's also a taxi company, autonomous taxi company called Owned by Eagles. And about halfway through the book, you discover that it's actually owned by eagles, that there's a trust for eagle habitats that is run by a DAO that runs the autonomous taxi cab company, and the taxis are literally owned by eagles. And so all of that stuff is really interesting. In practice, there's a kind of cynical security aphorism that smart contracts are they're bug bounties with unlimited upsides, in the sense that like if you find an error in the smart contract syntax, the nature of the contract is that you can effectively extract all of the money that the person who wrote the contract through that error. So it does create a certain kind of high stakes environment. And it seems like a lot of smart contracts are prone to those errors.
Yeah, there was actually famously with Ethereum, there was a $50 million donation system set up. And there was no bug in the smart contract. There was a bug in the Ethereum code underneath it. And someone found the bug and took all of the money. And this, by the way, tells you a lot about immutability versus the real world. When it's $50 million, Ethereum rolled everything back and pretended it never happened. Yeah. So the no centralized, you can trust everything, it's all fine. But actually the best thing happened. The outcome for those people happened because they broke every rule that they claimed to live by. I also worry about smart contracts, not only the problems, but the Oracle problem. I actually, just briefly, the Oracle problem is when smart contracts meet the real world. There was a big push, for example, to put land and property contracts all into a blockchain so they could never change. Well, what happens if there's a mistake? What happens if a court says, well, I don't care what your blockchain says, this property line is actually here and you can't actually change. So whenever the real world interacts with a smart contract, I sort of get worried. I don't wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I would push back on the idea that property law has much to do with the real world, but other than that, I'm with you.
Fair enough.
I mean, if anybody's ever had to type a legal description,
Yeah.
I think that then comes down to like really where like having a decentralized currency runs into problems. Like if you're trying to run like a decentralized currency under American law or European law, like, I mean, who really, like, really, where should the law be allowed to go? Like, I mean, the whole rollback of Ethereum. Can you imagine if like you just won the lottery and suddenly like just you had a rollback and you lost all of it just because someone changed it? Like, I mean, like, yeah, how, like, realistically, like, this I think is one of the biggest problems with decentralized is sort of who polices it, who watches the watchmen, as it were, for this.
Yeah, it's a very strange equilibrium, right? Because if you think about the kind of decision makers in Ethereum, and I think, the Ethereum mining pool was smaller then, and so that kind of consensus was easier to reach. But you're sitting there, you're saying, well, what will encourage people to trust Ethereum more? Leaving a $50 million fraud intact and showing people that when we say this is our principle, we mean it, or not having a network that kicks off with a $50 million fraud. And boy, it's a real rock and a hard place. And it points out that there are a lot of ways to arrange for third-party ledgers that don't involve a single trusted third party and that are still hard to game. So I wrote an article for Nature with a cryptographer named Ben Laurie, who works at Google and was the architect of a thing called certificate transparency. And the way that certificate transparency works, it's a thing that's in use today, is every time your browser hits a web page that is secure, that has HTTPS, it gets a little certificate that is signed by some certificate authority. And there are a lot of these. And some of them had been hacked by governments or compromised by governments to create what are called man-in-the-middle certificates that would let them spy on your Gmail session and so on. And the idea is to find out whether any of these certificate authorities are untrustworthy. And so as soon as you get the certificate, your browser automatically, and this is a thing your browser is doing right now, it makes a little fingerprint of that certificate. It says like, who signed the certificate, what domain was it for, and where did I see it? And it uploads it to one or more transparency servers where it is added to a thing called a Merkle tree, which is a cryptographic thing that looks a lot like the blockchain. And in fact, some blockchain technologies use them, but is nowhere near as computationally intensive and doesn't rely on proof of work. You can do all the computing for all the certificates that every computer in the world will receive on a couple of commodity PCs. You don't need, giant water-cooled arrays of ASICs crunching Sudokus, a million times a second to get at a Merkle tree that works. And it's an append-only ledger. And what that means is that within an hour of a certificate authority issuing a bogus certificate, if you are an organization like Google worried about a certificate being issued that isn't yours, you'll find it. And you'll have incontrovertible proof of which certificate authority issued it. And then you can petition the 3 or 4 major browser vendors to have that certificate authority pulled out of the browser's root of trust. And it's happened, right? We caught VeriSign issuing certificates for Google. They weren't doing it for nefarious purposes, but they had an idiotic test suite where when they put a new computer online, one of the standard tests they would do is issue fake certificates for Google. Right? This is just like a bizarre and stupid idea, right? So it's already working. And the idea is that because the ledgers themselves are unalterable, they're append-only ledgers, and because they're hosted in many places, that the coordination that you would have to do to delete all of the existing ledgers and replace them with ones that wouldn't reflect your alteration, especially since multiple users can download them and lots of people just download them for shits and giggles, means that if it does all the work of the blockchain with no proof of work, right? With no distributed compute, it's semi-centralized. And, as we heard with Ethereum, it's also kind of semi-centralized.
So this is way off topic, but it's related to something. I understand the developer who decided to generate ones for Google. Many years ago, I worked for the government on a system, and whenever I demoed it, because I always ordered a missile to demo what you could order. And one time my test data got into the live system and they literally put the missile on a truck and called my boss to make sure they wanted it delivered, or otherwise they were bringing me a missile. So yeah, developers, you're like, oh, I could create a certificate for Google. That would be awesome. I get it. As terrible as it is, I can put myself in that head. I'm very much more careful about my test data now, though.
Where did you put the missile after you got it? Like, did you just keep it like in your garage?
I never got a missile. I don't know what you're talking about.
He put it with the herd of cattle that he accidentally bought a futures contract for and then failed to unload in time.
Nice. So listen, we're in the last few minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Nothing in the Q&A right now.
I saw some stuff in the comments.
Yeah, somebody had a question about donut economics.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, so I went and looked it up. I confess I had to look it up. You know, I graduated from undergrad in 1998, when I was still on my first ever email address. So, you know, it looks like, as best as I can understand it, it just looks like a way of reorganizing the way we think about inputs and outputs into the economy. But I can't learn enough in this amount of time to really say anything particularly useful about
Fair
it.
enough.
Right.
That's kind of where I'm at. Like, I feel like anything I would say on donut economics would just almost misrepresent it because I know so little about what it is. So
Yeah.
So my thoughts on it
thought
are
so. It
it's
was
something I need to
funny,
learn
be
more about.
honest. I didn't think it was a real thing. I thought, yeah.
The economy of donuts. No.
Yeah.
I'll pay you 2 crawlers for
basing currency on something that it's like playing poker with pretzels or M&Ms. It's just a bad idea. You lose because you keep eating your money. I don't think that's what donut economics really is. So I'm not.
No, I mean it's named after the diagram.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Which it's an attempt to recategorize the way we look at the economy in a way that is theoretically more sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah. So someone's asked any book websites you can recommend to understand Bitcoin. One that it's a few years old now, but one that's really negative about it, but it's called Attack of the 50-Foot Bit Chain. And I don't recall the author. I should have had a list of resources because I've read a lot about it, but that one just the name stuck in my head. So a good hint for make sure your title is something that sticks in people's heads. But
well, I mean, I would actually put in a plug here for Corey's work, because one thing Corey does really well is you do a lot of like Schrodinger's cat kind of like, okay, let's look at what this actually means. We pull it out of the real world. And so you have cabs owned by eagles and Disneyland taken over by a bunch of adhocracies and fights over the Hall of Presidents and things like that, that when taken to that extreme might seem absurdist, but it's all pretty sound stuff. I mean, all those steps are pretty darn, it's kind of understanding how the underlying ridiculousness that underlies a lot of what we do without necessarily mocking it as ridiculous.
I'm gonna plug. That's very kind of you. I'm gonna plug Carl Schrader's Stealing Worlds, and I just pasted a couple of podcasts that I've done about Bitcoin. One with the Epicenter, and one with the Bitcoin podcast. But Schrader's Stealing Worlds is I think the best depiction of blockchain and distributed currencies in as a means of fighting fascism in science fiction. It's a stellar novel. I can't say enough good things about it.
And I in case he's too modest to do this, I will strongly recommend Corey's new book, Attack Surface, as a great way of learning about the fragility of technology and how frustrating it is from all sides. I mean, particularly from when you're rooting for a technologist who's doing horrible things. But
thank you.
I think it's a really great introduction into a lot of that.
Being able to grab the books makes me feel like a prop comic. It's like Carrot Top meets a con. It's great.
If you have a watermelon, then I'll be impressed.
Yeah.
I will say just like I don't have a lot of good books or websites. Like I would say part of my research material, I did go back and rewatch the John Oliver Bitcoin episode. Like there's a
Yeah.
little bit there that's very, very, very high level, and some of it's kind of outdated, some of it's not quite accurate, but it can give you something. I've also noticed like it is starting to work its way into Hollywood, and I feel like I just saw this Netflix show, How to Sell Drugs Online Fast, and like they kind of go into Bitcoin, and like I don't know that it's really accurate, but it does show like sort of the like how do you like try to translate it out from like a Bitcoin wallet into like actual human currency and still keep it anonymous, and like there's some weird stuff in there that it at least provokes some thought.
Although some, always take Hollywood with a grain of salt.
Of course,
where they for what they want to be given, they hold a guy for ransom. And they want to be given options that they can later sell. It's like, just ask for the stock and have them run
Yeah.
off the price of the
No,
stock. I mean, like, options is like a totally you're getting
Yeah.
too far from the notional at that point. For crying out
Yeah,
loud, just get the
they might cancel those. I don't know.
I demand 1 billion complex derivatives.
Yeah,
it's just like, just
I'm
ask for
looking
the
for
stock for crying out.
$1,000
Ask for deeds to the freaking factory. It's like,
I want the B tranche of some collateralized debt obligations.
Yeah, I'll also say this: if you, not only Hollywood, but if you're meeting with a business person who is explaining to you their business based on blockchain, 90% of the time they have no idea what they're talking about. And a significant number of the technologies that claim to be based on blockchain are, oh yeah, and we wrote the word blockchain somewhere in the comments. So
I've known people that have people that have put blockchain in their resume just to get it read.
Yeah.
I was
SEO.
at I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said SEO.
Yep.
Yeah, I was at a
Pretty much.
conference last year with a very nice person from an NGO, and I can't tell if they had been bamboozled or were being very bad at describing something, but they had this plan to put like the genome of heirloom seeds in the blockchain as a means of you knowing whether it was grown by a farmer that had access to the seeds. And I was just like, but wait a second. Like, how do you know? Like, so, I mean, even assuming this whole kind of cockamamie scheme works, A, how do I know that the correct sequence was input into the blockchain if I
Right.
wasn't there? They're like, oh, you just have to trust it. I'm like, well, then why don't you just put a label on it if we
Right.
just have to trust it, right? And then like, B, how do I validate it, right? Where is my gene sequencer in my kitchen that lets me know whether or not these beans are like the beans that I think I'm buying that are fair trade?
I don't think Svalbard is up for that.
Yeah.
And C, given the size of the blockchain, like, is this really something you couldn't just do in a database or something like that?
Well,
Seriously.
I mean, it's immutable, right? But it's not fraud repellent, right? Like
Right.
if you put fraudulent information in to begin with, it will remain fraudulent until the end of time. That's what an immutable database is, right?
Yeah, I just read an article about a town in the Netherlands that set up a, they hired this hotshot kid straight out of college, right? I don't think he was even in college, to build this system for doing benefit payments. They had this horrible system, and it's like, we're going to have this great blockchain system, and it, you'll be able to get your payments on your smartphone. And they built this system, and it was fantastic. Everybody loved it. And someone came to interview the kid and said, so this system you built is great. What is it? So, and you're using blockchain for it? Well, no, but it's a database. But it wasn't until the word blockchain came out that it got the interest and the excitement of the town to invest in doing what they should have done originally. So, but articles were written all over the world about this wonderful blockchain system that doesn't actually use a blockchain.
In 2018, the FT reported that 90% of on-ramp into blockchain, so that's like where a fiat currency is exchanged for BTC, was denominated in renminbi. And so that whole bubble was basically, all these people who were like, I bought Bitcoin and I was really smart because I anticipated it would go up or whatever. What they did was lucked into buying an asset class that was being inflated by corrupt officials defeating currency controls. And, just like all those people who bought apartments in Vancouver and were like, look at me, I'm Warren Buffett. It's like, no, you just happen to luck into an asset class that's being used to launder money primarily by Chinese corrupt officials, right? I mean, this is not investment acumen. This is like lucking into a positive externality of a global crime spree.
Well, it's literally gambling.
Yeah,
I mean, investing is all can sometimes hew kind of close to it. This is all the way in.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're not gonna be like judging based on like this company's doing better or worse. It is just like, well, hope this goes.
Yeah.
So we are basically out of time, but if I'd like everyone to just do their last sum up, if they would. Start with Emily.
Okay, I'll hold up my little book. This is a proof. I got my degree at Oxford back in the day. And so I write some children's books set in Britain. That's about as well as I can dovetail that in.
Tim?
Okay, I don't really have a whole lot to look up, but I will say if you want to see another fun story of blockchain, of like Bitcoin, look up the Dogecoin, which was basically supposed to be a parody that itself took off. A lot of fun. Okay.
Yeah.
Very true. 2020 was obviously the best year ever to publish because it's a year you can go out and tour and the press is not thinking about anything else, and so they got a lot of time for you. So 2020 was the year I published 4 books. There's Posey the Monster Slayer, my first picture book about a little girl who likes tearing apart her toys and turning them into field expedient monster killing weapons. There's the reissue.
Is this a write what you know thing, Corey?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Maker Kids for sure. The reissue of Little Brother in Homeland with an introduction by Ed Snowden, which I was very excited about. Attack Surface, the 3rd Little Brother book, and then on 1.0, which is an imprint of Medium, for free, you can read my pamphlet, How to Destroy Surveillance Capitalism, which is an anti-monopoly critique of the surveillance capitalism hypothesis, which is basically that, rather than Robert Mercer having stolen Google's mind control ray that was developed to sell fidget spinners and repurposing it to make your uncle racist, what's actually happening is we have these giant monopolies that distort all of our policy and all of our discourse, and that they're not run by evil geniuses, they're run by mediocre sociopaths who are modern day Rockefellers and Mellons and Carnegies, and we need to do to them what we did to those other guys, which is break up their companies.
And just because I've been dissing Bitcoin continuously, I will point out the one actually really cool Bitcoin thing. I posted a link to a visualization where you can see all of the transactions that are going on, dropping down in different size balls and cubes and things. And it's amazingly relaxing. So there is true value in Bitcoin there. And I want to thank my fantastic panelists. I think this was a great conversation, so I really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
everyone.
moderating. Emily, it was so nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Those of you that are able, head over to Discord and hang out in the Neverland channel for a little while if people want to follow up with us.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Oh, and I think we're supposed to mention that you can buy the author's books in the Con bookstore, and they have signed book plates for them as well.
Yes, and it may not be entirely obvious when you buy them that you'll get the book plates, but you should get them. So, for what it's worth, it's a third party handling it, and yeah. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream now. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.